Can you guys hear me? Okay, great. Cool. All right. I want you all to take a look at this image, otherwise known as an infographic. While it may inform us of the causes of climate change, does it make you feel hopeless a little bit? Maybe like you don't know what to do next or what the next step should be? In environmental communication, there has been a longstanding tradition of using only fact-based appeals in order to cause pro-environmental behavior. However, this often leaves our audiences feeling confused, disconnected, or still uninterested. So for my internship here, there's a lot of power in communication, and that's always been of interest to me. There is so much you can do in how you say things. You can inform others, inspire others, and reinforce information. For my internship here, I was working with the program on the environment with Mia and Pishan, and I learned a lot about the ins and outs of creating content for a collegiate department, as well as online marketing and branding. I also created their first ever social media guide, shown here. And during this work, I also created a segment called Capstone Corner, which highlights many of the students here in this room, showcasing the interdisciplinary nature of our own program on the environment. Now, while working in social media, I started to wonder, is a picture really worth 1,000 words? Is there importance to text and text-based appeals? So I wanted to look at what type of caption was best, ideal tone and length of Instagram caption for engagement. So I designed a little study in which I created Instagram posts about wind power. Now, it isn't necessarily a glamorous environmental topic, but that's exactly why I chose it. I wanted a topic that is niche enough that the average person wouldn't necessarily be fired up about it. So I wrote 2 captions that were logos, which is the logical rhetorical appeal, and 2 that were pathos, or the emotional rhetorical appeal. And in each of those buckets, I had a short caption and a long caption. So I sent those out in a randomized survey in which each respondent would get one of the 4 posts. Now, they were asked a series of questions, and they were all answered on a Likert scale. So these questions asked likelihood of doing an action, and it would range from 1 to 7, and 1 typically was very unlikely to do the action, and 7 was very likely to do the action, with a neutral sort of answer in the middle as 4. Now, when I got my survey back, I had over 300 respondents, and all of which were business majors since I sent it out to the Foster Marketing Lab. The average age of these students was 20 years old, so I was dealing with a bunch of undergraduate business majors. Now, when I got my results back, I categorized them in 2 different buckets. The first bucket was interaction with posts, which categorized things such as likes, comments, follows, shares, a more superficial way of looking at engagement. The second I looked at was interactions beyond posts, which looked at things like ability or interest in having a conversation outside of social media, looking at the perceived importance of the issue, or just interest in learning more about wind power. Now, when I got my results back, I was kind of surprised. As you can see here, not only was the engagement super low, as a reminder, the 4 was neutral, so anything lower than that was unlikely to engage, but the difference between the 2 was not statistically significant. So that was really interesting to look at. The same thing happened with short versus long. Not only was the engagement low, but there was not a statistical significant difference between the 2. Now, while my results didn't tell me whether tone or length made a big difference in engagement, it did tell me a lot about communication. The first is that the audience and the topic is huge for engagement. Obviously, no offense to any business majors in the audience, if they weren't interested in learning about wind power, my post didn't make them interested. So that's interesting to know, and we need to find out more ways to communicate. The second is that maybe a picture really is worth 1,000 words. There are studies that back this, that generally speaking, people engage more quickly and emotionally with images. So this makes sense for visually based sites such as Instagram. Now, while I wanted to look at other studies to see if my results differed, and they did. So generally speaking, being concise is best when looking at text-based marketing. And in terms of tone, it's not so simple. The majority of it lies in the audience. Speaking your audience's language is going to be key to connecting with them and finding ways to get them to care about environmental issues. Another big thing is including a direct call to action so that people know or give them examples of what to do. That's huge. And also, don't go spreading hopeless infographics. I'd like to thank my faculty advisor, Francesca Balsesia, who I would not be able to do this without, Pishan, Mia, my family, my friends, my entire cohort. Thank you so much. Cool. Yeah, anyone have any questions? Yeah.
So if I recall correctly, your survey was specifically for the Foster School of Business.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
So I have a question about that. One, do you think that only interviewing people from the Foster School introduced bias? And if you're given a second chance to do this survey, how would you design the demographic in order to reduce the bias in the survey, if there wasn't?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we basically asked about bias when surveying only business students and how I would redesign the survey if I had more time. That's a super good question. I'm glad you brought it up because if I had more time, I would love to talk about it. That was a huge thing for me, was the bias. I knew going into it that my answers would be skewed. Originally, when designing the survey, I was like, okay, I'm just going to send it out to my friends. But then I was like, oh, all my friends are environmental studies majors. That will introduce bias. So I found out about the Foster Marketing Lab and I was like, okay, this will be good because I'll get a lot of respondents, but that did increase or introduce bias, of course. If I could redesign it, I think the biggest thing would be finding more diverse audiences or just groups. I would love to just send it out to the general public and see where their responses are, but also looking at like different age groups, I think would be huge because obviously college students are in a bubble, and seeing what different age groups connect with, that would be great. Yeah, thank you for your question. Yeah.
Any questions for Jillian?
Yeah.
What advice would you give to your social media interns that maybe wasn't included in the social media guide?
Ooh, that's a really good question. That's a great question because the guide had a lot in it. I'm trying to think. Oh yeah, let me repeat the question. It was basically, what would you include in the social media guide aside from what you included in it? I should go over like what I included. I gave a lot of examples of what to post. I did also, similar to Rex, like demographic surveys to look at who was engaging with the POE Instagram and Facebook and different accounts. I think I would want more answers, like similar to what I looked at. I might include this in there to kind of give social media interns an idea of, okay, engaging with people. Like obviously you're going to engage with primarily POE students, so that, you're going to be mainly talking to them. But I think, I don't know, that's a really good question. I'm trying to think, but I think the biggest thing would just be including more curiosities and have them kind of explore that and see, what else they can do to connect with people outside of the major, I think would be great. Yeah. Yeah.
More questions?
Sure. Yeah, Tim.
Yeah, thank you. Great presentation again. It seemed like there were 3 conditions on either side of and you showed us results for one aspect of it. Were there any other sort of sub results that are? Yes.
So he was asking about, there were different conditions in my survey and I gave the answers mainly to one, which is a good point too. I was trying to look at findings. Another thing that I was going to include, but I had to cut for time. I looked at engagement levels with perceived interest and like perceived, like I examined, superficial sort of engagement. I call it superficial, but likes, comments, and then contrasted that with ability or interest in doing something outside of social media. But I also looked, I'm trying to think what else I looked at. There were a lot of different factors that I could kind of cross compare. I'd love to show you. I have some graphs, I could show you. But yeah, thank you.